It all started with what seemed like a normal day. Sarah, a 27-year-old woman with no serious medical history, began her period on a Wednesday morning. She thought nothing of it. Like always, she got up, took a shower, changed her pad, and went about her day. But within hours, something felt off. The flow was heavier than usual, much heavier. She figured it might be one of those months where her cycle hits a little harder. It happens, right? But by that evening, Sarah noticed something strange. Her pad was soaking through every 45 minutes. She brushed it off, convincing herself she was just stressed, or maybe had eaten something weird. But deep down, a small voice inside her started whispering, "This isn't normal." By day 2, the bleeding hadn't slowed down. If anything, it got worse. Now she was feeling dizzy, lightheaded, and weak. Every step felt like she was walking through wet cement. She tried to eat, but her appetite was gone. Her heart would race randomly even when she was lying down. And still, the bleeding didn't stop. At this point, Sarah was changing her pad every 20 minutes. She started to panic. She called her mother, who immediately told her to go to the hospital. But Sarah hesitated. She didn't have health insurance, and she didn't want to make a fuss. But the truth was, something much darker was already happening inside her body. By the third day, Sarah was pale and exhausted. Her bathroom looked like a crime scene, red everywhere. She was so weak that she couldn't even stand in the shower. The bleeding wasn't slowing down. It was pouring, thick, dark red blood with large clots the size of quarters. Her heart pounded as if it were trying to escape her chest, and she couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She finally gathered the strength to go to the emergency room. The nurse at the front desk took one look at her and immediately wheeled her back. Her blood pressure was dangerously low. Her pulse was racing. When the doctors asked how long the bleeding had been going on, Sarah weakly replied, 3 days, non-stop. Their faces changed. No one said it out loud, but Sarah could see it, the concern, the fear. They ran a full panel of blood tests, then an ultrasound, then more tests. Hours passed. Sarah laid there, hooked up to IV fluids to keep her hydrated, her hands cold, her fingers trembling. The doctors finally came in, and what they told her sent chills down her spine. They had found something in her uterus, something that shouldn't have been there, a mass. The bleeding was being caused by a tumor, one that had been silently growing for months, maybe even years. The mass was disrupting the lining of her uterus and triggering constant shedding, as if her body believed it was in an endless menstrual cycle. But it wasn't just any tumor. The doctors couldn't yet tell if it was benign or cancerous. That would require a biopsy. But one thing was certain. This wasn't normal. This was dangerous. Sarah's life was now hanging in a delicate balance. As they prepared her for a surgical procedure to stop the bleeding and take tissue samples, Sarah lay in bed, terrified. She had gone from an ordinary period to a potential life-threatening diagnosis in just a few days. How had this happened? How could something be inside her for so long without any signs? The truth is, many women live with reproductive health issues that go undiagnosed for years, until it's almost too late. The bleeding, her body's warning signal, was only the beginning. The operating room was cold. Sarah was barely conscious. As they rolled her in, the IV fluids, the painkillers, the blood transfusion, it was all a blur, a whirlwind. She had lost so much blood that her vision had started going dark at the edges, like she was slipping underwater. Before the anesthesia took her under, she remembered one thing, the doctor's eyes, that look. It wasn't just concern, it was urgency and fear. When she woke up hours later, her mother was sitting beside her, eyes red, hands trembling as she held Sarah's. The procedure had stopped the bleeding temporarily, but the doctors now had a clearer picture of what was happening inside her. The mass they found wasn't a random growth. It had a name, something Sarah had never even heard of. Uterine sarcoma. It was a rare and aggressive form of cancer, and the reason her period wouldn't stop was because the tumor had invaded the muscular wall of her uterus. Her body was trying to fight it, and in the process it was breaking itself apart. That's why the bleeding never stopped. That's why it kept getting heavier. Her period wasn't just a cycle, it was a signal, a cry for help. And now the enemy had a name. The room was silent. Her mother didn't know what to say, neither did Sarah. Cancer? It didn't feel real. She was only 27. She worked out. She didn't smoke. She tried to eat healthy. She had missed a few doctor visits, sure. But cancer? That felt like something that happened to other people. Not her. Not now. But the truth is, uterine sarcoma often doesn't show signs until it's too late. For some women, the first symptom is nothing more than slightly heavier periods. For others, it's a sharp pain during sex, or a bloated belly that never seems to go down. For Sarah, it was relentless, unstoppable bleeding. Her body had been screaming for help. She just didn't know how to listen. The doctors laid out her options. Immediate surgery to remove her uterus, a full hysterectomy, would be necessary. Then, depending on the biopsy results, she might need radiation, chemotherapy, both. The words felt like bullets, one after the other. No kids, no fertility, just survival. Sarah broke down. That night, lying in the hospital bed, she stared at the ceiling for hours. Her body was drained, her blood pressure still recovering, but her mind was racing. All the signs she had ignored, the fatigue, the random back pain, the bloating, even the irregular spotting a few months ago, she had blamed it all on stress, on hormones, on life. But her body had been trying to tell her something, and now it was screaming. In the days that followed, the tests confirmed the worst. Stage 2 uterine sarcoma. The cancer hadn't spread beyond her uterus yet. But it was aggressive, fast-moving. The doctors urged her not to wait. Surgery was scheduled within the week. Sarah went through with the hysterectomy. When she woke up, she knew a piece of her had been taken. Not just a part of her body, but a future she had always imagined. A family, children, all of it, gone. But what mattered now was staying alive, surviving. The bleeding had finally stopped, but only because the entire source had been removed. The tumor was out. The nightmare, at least physically, was over. But emotionally, the fight was just beginning. The hardest part wasn't the surgery. It wasn't the recovery or even the chemo sessions that followed. It was the silence of not knowing, of wondering how long the cancer had been there, how many warning signs had passed by unnoticed, how many other women might be walking around right now, just like she had been, completely unaware. Sarah spent the next few months slowly rebuilding her strength. Her hair thinned, her energy dropped, but her will to fight grew stronger. Every doctor visit, every test result, every drop of blood taken from her veins, it reminded her that she was still here, still fighting, still breathing. But the questions lingered. Why didn't she know about uterine sarcoma? Why had no one ever talked about it? Why was it that, even with so many visits to clinics over the years, not one doctor had picked up on the possibility? The bleeding was loud, but the information was silent. Sarah decided that silence had to end. She began sharing her story online. First a few anonymous posts, then videos, then a blog. And suddenly messages started pouring in. From women who had gone through the same thing. From others who had never heard of uterine cancer, but had also been ignoring heavy bleeding. Sarah's words were opening eyes, saving lives. She realized that far too many women don't know what a normal period really looks like. They normalize the pain, the fatigue, the blood loss. They blame it on stress or age or birth control. But abnormal bleeding, especially when it's heavy, prolonged, or paired with symptoms like dizziness or severe cramps, can be a red flag. And yet we don't talk about it. Sarah's story is more than a warning. It's a wake-up call. Heavy bleeding isn't just an inconvenience. Sometimes it's a siren. And ignoring it can cost you your life. 1 year later, Sarah stood on a stage at a women's health event. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were fierce. She spoke about the night the bleeding wouldn't stop, the hospital, the diagnosis, the surgery, the grief, and most of all, the silence that nearly killed her. She urged every woman in that room, listen to your body. Don't ignore it. You only get one life. Don't let it bleed away. The months turned into a year. And though Sarah fought with everything she had, the truth about aggressive cancers is harsh. They don't always play fair. Her surgery had bought her time. Her chemotherapy had slowed it down. But the cancer was relentless. By the second year, the doctors told her what she already feared deep down. It had spread, her lungs, her spine. Tiny tumors, too small to see with the eye, but large enough to choke the future out of her plans. She cried in the silence of her bedroom, not because she was giving up, but because she had fought so hard, and it still wasn't enough. There was nothing fair about it. She had listened to her body. She had done the surgery, taken the medicine, shared her story. And yet, the cancer had found a way. A cruel, quiet way. But Sarah wasn't finished. Not yet. Instead of hiding away, she made a decision. If her life was being taken from her, she would give the rest of it away on her own terms, to others. To every woman who might still have time, to every girl who had yet to face her first cycle, to every person who thought period pain was just part of being a woman. She began recording her final thoughts, not dramatic, not performative. Just real, honest, heartbreaking, and powerful. She talked about the stigma, the way people laugh off heavy periods, how even in doctors' offices, women are often told to wait and see, or that it's probably just hormonal. How many women feel shame or embarrassment over talking about their periods at all. Sarah had learned the hard way that silence was more dangerous than any symptom. She talked about her body, how it had betrayed her, but also how it had tried to warn her. She remembered lying in her bathroom on the third day of the bleeding, her hands pressed to her stomach, the world spinning around her. That was the moment she almost gave up, but now she saw it differently. That was the moment she chose to live, even though death was already close. The messages from women continued to pour in. Some were terrified, others were grateful. One woman, only 19 years old, had seen Sarah's story and gone to a doctor after months of ignoring her symptoms. She, too, had a tumor, but hers had been caught in time. She would live. She would grow old. Because Sarah had spoken, and that gave her peace. In the final weeks of her life, Sarah wrote a letter. It was addressed not to her family, not to her friends, but to every woman, everywhere. The last lines read, "Don't let them silence you. Don't silence yourself. You are not being dramatic. You are not overreacting. If your body is screaming, listen, because I didn't know how to, and now I'm out of time." Sarah passed away quietly, surrounded by her mother and sister, the two people who had held her hands through the darkest hours. But her voice did not fade. Her videos remain. Her story is still being told, and with every woman who watches, who listens, who acts, Sarah lives on. Her period wouldn't stop flowing, because a monster had made a home inside her. A monster no one saw coming. A monster called silence. But in the end, it wasn't cancer that defined her story. It was courage.